Hey, everybody, welcome to our virtual meetup for the month of January. My name is Aaron Lebeau. I'm a developer advocate at Couchbase, and with me, I've got my very close and good friend, Dennis. Dennis, how are you doing today?
Hi, Aaron. Thanks for having me. How are you
Oh,
doing?
you know what? I survived the holiday period, right? It's January. It's a little cold where I'm at, but honestly, survived the holiday period here for another year. And honestly, 2022 is already shaping to be a better year than 2021. And so I'm really kind of
Hopefully, yeah.
excited. There's a lot of cool things. Hopefully, this whole pandemic thing will get eventually behind us and we'll start talking to people. Went to a conference this month actually and talked to real physical developers, got to talk with them and stuff. And honestly, that felt pretty great. It really did. So,
Yeah, I guess I was in a conference 5 months ago,
mhm.
and I was impressed to see that. Oh yeah, we still talk to real people. They're not just floating heads in a Zoom call, right?
Exactly. In the
And
ether. They're
it's
not just random people on the internet. You can literally
yeah,
have real conversations with people. It feels good to get back to that,
it
the
feels
human
good.
interaction. So it's really cool. Well, we've got a really excited show for everybody here today. A reminder that, this will be available on video demand afterward on both Twitch and on YouTube. So if you have to cut out early or anything like that, that's perfectly great. We'll have links available to that. You can go to our YouTube page and see that stuff. Before we get started with our talks today, we've got a couple really good ones. I want to kind of mention real quickly here, do a little housekeeping. So, one, if you're new to Couchbase, you're like, hey, I just saw Aaron's tweet on Twitter about cool things with mobile testing, but what is this Couchbase stuff? Couchbase is awesome. Couchbase is a cloud and server platform based solution for doing NoSQL document databases. Capella is our cloud based solution. And the really cool thing about it is that you can get up and running. It costs you nothing. There's a free trial, and you literally don't have to set up any infrastructure. There's no Docker, there's no any kind of containerization you have to do on your computer, which means you can go from zero to hero very quickly. And so you can just go to our main website, you can click on the products, and then you can go to Capella, and there's a free trial button. That's really kind of great. Now, the other cool thing we have that kind of goes along with Capella is we have something called our Playground website, and that's at couchbase.live. Now, the Playground website is designed so that you don't have to necessarily download our SDKs to try out Couchbase. You can either use a sandbox session, which means it's going to run Couchbase for you in some kind of solution on the cloud that you don't need to understand or set up, or if you have Capella, you literally can just go through and drop in your Capella config. It's going to ask you for an IP address. We have directions to explain this. It's pretty easy. You can click your language of platform of choice. For example, if you're a Python developer, you can just click here and it gives you all the code to get started. And you could tweak this code and play around with it, just like all the other Playground solutions out there. And so it's a really cool way that if you want to just see what's going on with Couchbase or try it out, you could totally do that very, very quickly. Now, finally, we have our developer portal. And so for this month, we're constantly changing it. So I highly recommend checking it out. But what we've done in the last 30 days, and I want to give a big shout out thanks to a couple developers on our team, Elliot and Dima, and Samir. They've all worked pretty hard on getting a video solution running on our website. Now, this means that all of our videos from Connect 2021 and 2020 are now available. This is over 100 hours of content about everything from edge computing to Capella to how to set up mobile apps. There's all kinds of really great stuff here, content that you can consume, and all the transcripts are there. So you can click on any of these videos. For example, this Connect 2021, we have this how to get off from legacy over into a NoSQL world. It's a really great talk. We have the video here, and you can see here we've got all the transcripts are also there available. So really kind of great. You can watch these anytime you want now. You don't have to go to that website you used to have to go to register to see the videos. You can just go to developer.couchbase.com and all the videos are there. So with that, we've got a great show for you this month. So first of all, Dennis, you are who I consider the expert on most things Couchbase. I'll just be honest with you. But really, it blows my mind every single time I even think about how does search really work inside of certain platforms and stuff? And you are the guru. And so I'm excited that you have a talk this month to kind of go through and explain what FTS is, or for nerds that don't necessarily know what that means, full text search and how that works inside of Couchbase. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to you.
Cool. Thank you very much, Aaron. And let's get started. Let me share the screen. Cool. Okay. So, guys, what I'd like to do today is something really different. One, I would like to talk about full text search, which is something completely different than what most developers know about software development in general. And the good thing here is that we will also show you how to use Couchbase in a way that you never thought of. Okay, just a brief introduction about myself. My name is Dennis. I work as a developer advocate at Couchbase. One of the reasons why I understand a lot about search is because, one, I ran an SEO agency for roughly 2 years, and back then it was when Google was starting. Google was still on the early steps, so we essentially did a lot of things to understand, a lot of research to understand how Google works, and it made me understand a lot about, I learned as well a lot about search. And because of that, I also started working with Solar, and that's pretty much where my whole knowledge of SEO and search came from. I did a kind of almost a master degree in search, I would say, during those 2 years. And I kept studying SEO and how Google keeps improving the search algorithm since then. And this talk is essentially I'm trying to simplify search and show you how you can implement a very cool search inside Couchbase from scratch, essentially. Cool. All the code that I have here is on my personal GitHub right now. So Dennis WS Rosa / Couchflix. However, it will be soon available on Couchbase Examples. So Couchbase Examples is our official GitHub repository at Couchbase. And there we have all tutorials that are tested and maintained by the DA team. Aaron will talk this about Aaron will talk about this later on, so I'll not spend too much time on this. But the reason why my demo is not there yet is because we have a lot of restrictions on how we add repos to new projects here, because we have all sorts of tests and checks to guarantee that the tutorials will always be fully functional here. So whatever you see on developer on Couchbase Examples, it will always be tested and updated with the latest versions of the SDK and the latest versions of the framework that you're seeing. Okay, with that, I would like to just talk about the agenda today. We pretty much code a good portion of the time, and we also have a few slides to explain some core concepts. But I apologize in advance if my network is a bit unstable. I'm in the middle of Siberia right now, so you can guess how cold it is outside. And as you might expect, in the middle of the Siberia, connections are not that great. Cool. So let's do one thing. In this demo, I will build one search for movies, a simple movie search, but I want this movie search to be a Google-like, right? I just have one single input where I try to search for a movie, and then the engine has to give me the best results possible, right? So let's say, for instance, that I want to search for the Dark Knight trilogy here, right? A naive way to implement that in SQL or in Nickel is to write select star from movies where title like Dark Knight. And I add here the wildcard at the end because guess what? I want all the 3 Dark Knight movies, right? But the problem with this implementation is that the movie is actually called The Dark Knight, right? So if I just search for Dark Knight and wildcard, it will return 0 results. Which means that, okay, I could just change my query to add a wildcard in the beginning and a wildcard at the end. The issue here is that this kind of query in a relational database triggers a full table scan because there's no index in a binary tree that can index this kind of thing here when you have one wildcard in the beginning and one wildcard at the end. And as you might guess, your query here will be slow because we have to go through every single title in the database to match Dark Knight. We could make this even worse, right? Let's say we want to, in our search now, we also want to be case insensitive. So we want to allow people to write everything in lowercase as well, because of course when you are on your Xbox controller or when you are on the Fire Stick, you usually just write everything in lowercase. So if you want to do that with Nico or SQL, that's good. You can just call the lower function here, right? However, again, because we're doing a full table scan, on every single comparison, we need to convert the title to lower. And again, it will impact the performance of your query. We can make this even worse, right? What if I want to handle typos? Or what if I want to search in multiple fields? So for instance, oh, by the way, apart from searching on the title, I also want to search on director, on description of the movie, and so on. So we are making full table scans in multiple attributes. Or even, which is almost next to impossible here to do in pure SQL, is how do I guarantee that the best matches will be the first items of the list, right? Because that's what we want. That's why we want to implement a Google-like search, right? This is one of the reasons why Google became so popular compared to other search engines that we have in the past, like Alta Vista, if you are old enough. Cool. So those things are next to impossible to build with pure SQL. And that's why you need a search engine. A search engine can cover all these use cases for you. However, adding a search engine can be painful because naturally, let's say you want to decide to use Elasticsearch or Solr, it will naturally increase the cost with servers because now you need to spin up a new server. It will increase your infrastructure complexity as well. You have to do some code changes and some data synchronization between your database and the indexes on the search engine. And at the end of the day, it might not just worth the effort. So if all you're doing is an advanced search on your back office system, you don't want all the, like, just to deliver that feature, you don't want to spin up Elasticsearch or add a lot of complexity on your system when potentially search is not one of the cores of your system, right? And that's one of the cool things with Couchbase full text search. Essentially, if you're using Couchbase and you want to do some advanced search in your application, you can just simply go to search, create an index, and yeah, you're good to go. You can use the same SDK. You can just start doing full text search queries directly from the SDK that you are already using. And the search engine is, we use Blythe. So Blythe is an open source search engine based in Golang, built in Golang. So it's really performant. And and yeah, that's something that you can definitely leverage if you're already using Couchbase. I guess this talk is more an exercise and a class about search in general, and of course, like to some extent, how you can build this inside Couchbase. But you can leverage the knowledge that you have here with other tools as well. And we even have connectors for Elasticsearch as well. So pretty much everything that you see here applies to other tools as well. But one thing that I would like to highlight is that search is not about matching text. I think a lot of people are confused that when they say, okay, full text search is about just finding this text on all the documents that I have. No, it is not. Search is a heavily conversion-oriented feature. So the goal of search is whenever you type something, the users type something, you need to show the very first result should be what the user is looking for. And when you think about it, let's say on Netflix, when you search for a movie, even when they don't have that movie, they will recommend you very close movies to that, like in the same category or similar, because they want you to watch movies. That's how they make the conversion, right? They want you to keep watching series and movies, because then that's how you realize, oh yeah, that's the time I'm spending with Netflix worth my subscription. On Google, they want you to answer your question and also show ads in the meantime. And on Amazon, for instance, they want to show products that you want to buy. So it is very important to show the best results possible on the very first items should be the best results possible, right? It doesn't, if you bring like 100 results and I have to scan to those 100 results, I might give it up and not buy, and end up not buying anything. It is also important to understand how users search, right? So one of the first things when you implement a search feature is you need to start saving the queries that the users make, because then you understand how they search, and then you can adjust your queries or your search itself to deal with those type of searches. So for instance, on Google, most people use 1 to 3 words to search on Google. And that's how they have to optimize their algorithm for. So maybe in your search, people you search for names or for product names or for product categories. So you need to save those queries and review them to adjust your algorithm to rank or to show better results according to how users search. Cool. Before we move to code, I think it's important to highlight some core concepts in full text search. The first one is naturally inverted indexes. So inverted indexes are the reason why full text search is super fast while matching text, because instead of having a standard binary tree, what the full text search does is essentially it creates a big table of the words and where they are, in which documents they are appearing, right? So for instance, let's say the word fox here appear on document 0 and on document 2 here, in this case here. So whenever someone searches for fox, the search engine go to this table and say, okay, yeah, I know, I just found this word, and this word appear on those 2 documents. So that's the 2 documents I need to return. That's one of the main reasons why full text search is so good at matching text. The second core concept that I think is pretty important is score. So a score is essentially how calculated to how close the match, how close the match that I just how much the text that user sent match with the document that that was a hit, right? And this number is really, there is no standard on how much this number is. It could be any kind of number, like depends of how you boost your number or how much matches you have. But the importance is the higher the score, the more relevant the number is, right? So this is one thing to bear in mind. So whenever you use full text search, sort for score, and the best result will be on the top. The second concept here, and I know it might be a little bit overwhelming here in this part, but it will get easier, is something called TF-IDF. So TF-IDF stands for Term Frequency Inverse Document Frequency. So what that means is that higher words score higher. So if I'm finding for, let's say if I search for is or a or to, those are very common English words, so they tend to appear on every single phrase. So if I have a match on those kind of documents, they will not impact that much on the score. But let's say concepts is you see less often this word in phrases in general. So if you search for concepts and I have a match on concept in a phrase, it will have a higher impact on the final score as well. The next the next concept is edit distance, which is also sometimes referred as Levestein distance as well. And put it simply, it's just how many operations it takes to convert one word to another. So in this case here, to convert star to start, it only takes one operation here, which is adding a new letter. So the edit distance between star and start is 1. If we say, okay, what is the edit distance between star and stop? It will be 2, because now I need to replace A with O and R with P. So we have a distance between start and stop of 2. And the last key concept here is something called pivoted length normalization, which essentially means that if you match a text in a small phrase, it will have a higher impact on the score than if you match a text in a 5,000 words essay, right? It makes a lot of sense, right? Like if you have this word here that matches in this small phrase, it definitely should be should rank higher than having the same word in a book, for instance. So that's pretty much how pivot length normalization works. With that, let's get started. So let me go here to my application. So here I'm hiding some of the complexities here, but essentially I just getting the text that is coming out from the front end, and then I do a simple search against the Couchbase full text search here. So here's the index name, so moves all index, and here's the query. The word here is just a query that's coming from the front end. If I come here to Couchbase, this is how I'm searching for movies. So as you might guess, our application is called Couchflix, and I would just search for movies here, and this is how a movie looks like. So we have, let's say, the tagline, the title, let's say the genres, the cast, the budget, popularity, and all those sort of things, right? And here, if you go to search, I already pre-created the index here just to save on time. But this index is pretty simple. So we have the underscore class here, which is I use as a type, the type of the document. And then I only say to my full text search, okay, I want to index all documents where the attribute is, the type attribute is movie. And that's pretty much it. That's now, you can create this index in literally 1 minute. Cool, so let's go to our application here. And okay, yeah, we're just grabbing the text and then running against the database here, the full text search. And also it also has the ability to highlight content. So I can go here and let's try something. Let's say Batman, right? And you see, cool, there is it's showing up some Batman movies. And if you click one of the Batman movies here, it will show you where we had this this match. So you see that, okay, we have here a match on the title, on the character, on the original title, there's Batman here. On the overview, we have Batman here. And here is the score, which is something quite important for this, this demo. Same if you click on another here, you see here highlighted, oh yeah, here's the score. And here is all the attributes where we had a match on Batman. Let's try something else. Let's say Star Trek. And again, okay, that's pretty good. So we have here some Star Trek movies, right? And cool. And here is essentially the score and all the matches. So original title, and overview. Let's try something else now. So Star Wars. Oh, okay. Here looks like we have a problem, right? Because we see here galaxy, plastic galaxy, okay. And then we have here, what the heck is that? Let's click on this one and try to understand why this is getting returned. So it looks like in the overview, we have here Star Wars. Is this the correct one? Yeah. Star Wars, Turkish Star Wars. So that's why this is getting returned as a second result. But we have so many better Star Wars movies here, like episode 2 and episode 1 and episode 3. So why this is getting returned here? So I guess one thing we could do here is to try to improve our search, right? So let's do that then. Let's go back to here to IntelliJ, and let's switch to search to. And I'm gonna play here again. So on search to, what we are doing here, I just send the implementation. And instead of, when you search by default on a document without specifying any fields, you are searching on all attributes of the document. And in this case, it might generate too much noise because as you have seen, we have matches on Batman on the casting. And that's not exactly what we want, right? We want to show movies that movies from Batman, and the best movies should be ranking first. So it just generates a lot of noise. One of the ways we could fix that is to add a disjunction query. Sorry, is to just limit on the just search on the title. And because we also want to support small typos, we wanted a disjunction query, which is essentially an OR operation in full text search. And in this disjunction query, I'm doing an exact match. So, okay, search for, let's say, Batman or Star Wars. And I also want to allow the user to have one typo. So let's say, if they search for Star War instead of Star Wars, I still want you to consider that match as well. I don't want you to exclude that result. So this here is this fuzziness is exactly what we talked about at this distance, right? How hard it is to how many operations it takes to convert, let's say, start to start. So this is the kind of thing that we are doing here. So let's go back to our search and try to, instead, just for us to be able to compare results, let's now search for Star Wars again. And yeah, that's pretty good. This is definitely much better than this thing here. Okay, that's awesome. Looks like we have some progress. But let's try to do something like Star Wars now. Ooh, I have a typo here, but looks like Star Wars. No, Star Wars, if I have a typo, although every single person in the face of Earth will understand that we are looking for Star Wars, our first results are not Star Wars related. Even if you go to Google here, google.com, and you search for Star Wars, it will understand that, yeah, we are looking for Star Wars, and we want to do the same. So let's go back to our search and say, and try to wonder a little bit, what could we do different here? So one of the potential things that we could do is to, let's stop our application and change to search tree. With search tree, the only difference between search 2 and search tree is that now we are also searching on the overview and the original title of the movie, right? So maybe it will help to reduce some of the noise when you search for a movie with some typos. So let's go here, search tree, let's play again. And then in the meantime, we can come back here. Let's duplicate our window so we can compare with the previous result. And hopefully by now application already started. Okay. And let's try again. Let's try first Star Wars just to be sure that everything's still working. Yeah, we had some changes on the positions, but still fine. A lot of relevant movies here. Let's try Star Wars now. And no, looks like we had 0 improvements. Okay, we even add more noise here now. Let's try to understand what is happening here. Let's click on this first one and try to understand where the matches are occurring. So in this first movie, looks like we have war in the title because War Machine. And then on the overview, we have Star, War, and there's like 3 matches here. 4 matches because we have here again as well. And that's one of the reasons why the score of this movie is so high. Okay, notice one thing here. The problem is that Star and War are being matched as 2 different words, right? And that's not what we want. We want them to be matched together because they only make sense together. And in order to do that, we need to use something called Let me go back here to the slides. A shingle. So a shingle is a different kind of tokenization in full text search. By default, full text search will break into words, so star and words and daisy and readly, right? Pretty much like the index that I sent you guys before. But if we define a shingle, we can say, oh, no, I want you to create the index based on, let's say, on 2 or 3 words per time, right? So in this case, it will create one entry in the index called Star Wars, another entry called Wars Daisy, and another entry called Daisy Ridley. And Daisy Ridley is essentially like just one of the actors of one of the Star Wars movies. Actress, actually. Okay, so if we change our indexing type here, in theory, that should solve our issue here with relevancy, right? Because we are searching for movies and we are not getting relevant results. So luckily, I already created this index here before the talk, and we can go through this now. So I have this index here, which is nothing really special, to be honest. It's very similar to the previous one. The only difference here is I already added all the attributes because let's say release here, right? Release here is a number, and I want that to be a number because I want to do range queries with it. And if I don't specify that, it will simply assume that everything is text. But I have all my other attributes that I need here already. And one thing that you see is, let's say on title here, I have something called title analyzer. And what this title analyzer is doing is you define the analyzers here in the bottom, analyzers. And then see we have titles analyzer here. And this title analyzer, let's add it. And you see, okay, this title analyzer is converting everything to lowercase. It is removing stop words. So stop words in English is everything like the, a, and those words that appear all the time and just generate noise. And it also has this thing here called shingle simple. And if you close here and we go to custom filters, you see we have defined here this shingle simple here. And this shingle simple is essentially saying, okay, I want you to break the tokenization will happen 2 words at a time, right? This is exactly what I just talked about on our on the slides. So here is how it works, and that's how essentially you create a token filter, and then we create an analyzer that has your token filter, and then you use that analyzer on your attribute. Cool. So let's go back to our code now, and let's switch from search tree to search for. And search for, the only difference between search tree and search for is that search for is using a different index now. Instead of using that original index that we had called movies all index, it is using the movies with shingle. Shingles are really good when you're searching for usernames, like not usernames, but people's names, because quite often if you have like David something, you want to match those 2 words together, right? While if you're using for search for username, so username is just one single word, so it doesn't make sense to use shingles for that. You can just use the traditional full text search approach. So let's go back to our search here, and let's duplicate that because we want to keep track of how we are evolving. And let's try again. Star War now. Here, of course, the correct approach will be Star Wars. Well, I want to use the wrong approach here, Star War. And yeah, looks like we are back on track, right? We still search for Star War here, and here Star War, and we have much better results now. Cool. There are many other things many other kinds of tokenizations you could use. I will not talk about them here. Just for instance, we have steaming. So steaming is a way that you can convert words to the root, right? So fishing, fisher will be converted to just fish. And this is really good when you have language that you have, there's let's say in some languages you don't have the verb to be. So you need to change the ending of the word to say, oh yeah, I belong to sorry, there's some languages that don't have the verb to be, and you need to change the end of the word to use that as some sort of verb to be, to say, oh, this belongs to this. Russian is an example of that. The correct word here is some languages that have a lot of declinations. And when you have declinations, stemming is one of the things you could use, for instance, to fix that. Cool. Now, I guess now that we have our search working here and we are bringing some relevant results, it is time to think about ranking factors, right? Because, okay, this is the original Star Wars movie, and I think when someone searches for Star Wars, they are probably not searching for Robot Chicken. They want like Star Wars, or they want the original movie, or maybe they want like some of the new ones, like Force Awakens and Rogue One. So let's try to do that here. So we need to think about ranking factors, and ranking factors are pretty important. So that's how search engines define what comes first. On Google, for instance, they search for keywords on the title, on the URL, on content and backlinks. Amazon, they search on the description, on specification, if the product has photos, on being pretty much similar to Google. And there are different types of ranking factors as well. So we have the standard ones, which are general information about that item, like we are doing here, like release year, ratings, and so on. We have signals, which is let's say how often users pick this result versus this other. So if users pick often the third or the fourth result instead of the first one, it means that you probably should promote the third result to be the first one then. And we also have personalization. So let's say if I like thriller movies, you probably should prioritize thriller movies over like drama movies or comedy movies, right? And this is just an example like how Google does. So Google also, of course, some of those things are hidden, right? This is just some studies that some research people do to try to understand how Google ranking works. And this is kind of the distributions of the ranking factors on Google, right? You see that, okay, if you have a lot of links, it will impact up to 60%. Your let's say review signals, it report 50%, and so on. And in our case, I would say when you are first implementing your search, you have to try to guess what is the correct weights for your search, and then later on you can adjust according to the result of how much you like the results, how much the users like the results. So in this case, let's say, okay, the title will boost by 30%, the description by 50%, the release year we can penalize, so we can decrease the 50% or improve or boost 10%, and so on. Okay, let's do that now. So let's switch here from search 4 to search 5. And on search 5, what we're going to do is pretty much the same thing that we do on search 4, but now we are boosting, right? Now we have like we are boosting the title, and we are boosting the original title as well. And okay, we're still matching the overview, but yeah, okay, that's great that you have a match on the overview, but not sure if this is as relevant as the title and as the original title. So this is how we try to still return some other results, but we want to prioritize the best matches. And now if we come here, let's go back to, let's duplicate this again. And let's try the same thing, Star Wars. And if you compare one with another, you see that, okay, there is no change at all, Dennis. So did we just waste our time here? No, because search is a little bit complex. Remember when I talked about scores? Okay, if you go here on let's go to the score in the first movie. On our previous search, the score it was 04397. Now, oops, sorry, on the previous one, the score was 04509. On the new result here that we just implemented on search 5, the score is 0439. So it just got less relevant, right? Yeah, just got less relevant, which means that, okay, we are in the right direction. We don't want Robot Chicken to be the most relevant movie when you search for Star Wars. Let's see about now the original Star Wars movie here. So the original Star Wars movie here, and in the previous one, let's see here, 3, 2, 4, 5, and here 3195. Okay, so what we did here made this movie here lose relevance, which is not what we want, which is fine as well, right? We need to start playing with attributes to see how it will affect your results, and then you can properly balance them. So, for instance, one of the things we could do is to play with release year. We are just boosting title and original title, but there's so many other attributes we could use as well. So let's say release year, right? And here is one thing very interesting, because for me, there's a lot of difference if a movie is from 2022 or if a movie is from 2020, right? There is 22 is pretty new. Maybe I haven't not watched this movie yet, but there's not a lot of difference for me if the movie is from 2004 or 2000, right? Because it's okay, that's like almost 20 years ago, so doesn't make that difference. So okay, that's fine. We can boost by release year as well, but we need to adjust the boosting according to how far the year is, right? And that's why we have something called decay functions or Gaussian decays, right? So in the beginning, let's say we have a huge drop on release year because we want to have this difference between a movie that just got released versus a movie that that was back in the past, right? And this is actually something quite popular, quite common. So Hacker News, Reddit, all those platforms, they have pretty much all algorithms there. They have Gaussian decays. Otherwise, what would happen is your favorite movie or the most watched movie would stay on the top forever, and that's not what we want. We want to, okay, that's awesome that this article was super popular, but as the time goes by, we want to start open space for new things, right? Because that's what keeps the platform live. So this is just was one of the previous algorithms that Hacker News used for Gaussian decay. And on Believe, we can emulate some decays using range queries. So I can do something like, okay, if the release year is between 0 and 4 years, boost the result by 1.25. If the movie is between 5 and 8 years old, less boost by 1.05. And then if the movie is super old, we can penalize the move by, let's say, 0.87. We can read this like 13. We essentially multiply the score by 0.13, right? No, sorry, 0.87. This is how you can do this with a full text search, but we do have even a better way of doing that, because you can do full text search directly from Nico. So you can write a Nico query, and we have this search function, right? And the search function allows you to query full text search directly from Nico, and you can do exactly what we are doing here on Nico. Here is exactly what we are doing here, like Star Wars, and fuzziness and boosting. Everything that we are doing here, we are doing directly from your Nico query. and then you can order by, you can join with other data inside your application as well. So you do have this power to combine traditional SQL with full text search. And because I have the score here, I could even create a user-defined function that I will call, and I will pass like release year, popularity, and I will manipulate the score as much as I want to. So I have this freedom to also create a user-defined function, which is essentially a JS function that I will call inside my query to manipulate the score. And we also have ratings, right? So ratings is something very interesting because a 5-star movies for me could be a 3-star movies for you. So we need to normalize how users rate as well. So there is some. So for instance, what is more important, like 20 votes on a movie with 5 stars, or let's say 3,500 votes in a movie that is 3.8 stars? How do you balance those things? And there are some formulas that we can use to calculate the confidence, right? This is just a very basic one that I already pre-calculated here in the database. And this is some of the examples of the results. So Robot Chicken has 6.8 votes, average rating 6.9. So confidence is 1.725. In Star Wars, they have more than 6,000 votes and an average of 8.1. Yeah, we have confidence here of 7. So if we boost by those numbers here, we could guarantee that, oh yeah, okay, those movies here will have a higher score, and at the end of the day, they will appear higher on the search result. And of course, you can always plan your business rules. So sometimes you say, okay, this item is on sales. So if by any chance there's a match, let's just boost this movie here by 3 or 300%, which will virtually guarantee that it will be one of the search results. Okay, so that's pretty much what we're going to do now. I know it's been a lot already on this thing, but essentially what I'm going to do here is go back to my search and switch to search 6. And on search 6, what we are doing is essentially boosting all those things. So we are boosting by release year, we are boosting by rating, we are boosting by popularity, and also in this case runtime is how long this movie was on movie theaters. So hopefully this should guarantee that, okay, the best movies, the best rated movies will be one of the first results. So let's go back to our search here. Here we have Star Wars, and hopefully if we duplicate here and we try again to search for Star Wars, which we are still using that type. I can still use search for Batman or everything else, right? Or Star Trek, everything still works. But if I search for the wrong movie, so Star Wars, now you see that, oh yeah, we are boosting. We have three pretty good movies here as the first results. And that's essentially how you play with full text search to make the most relevant results to appear first. There's one last thing that I'd like to show because I'm almost running out of time here. But we have something on full text search called facets. So facets are essentially those things here in the side, right? So whenever, let's say, you search for a laptop on Amazon, for instance, it allows you to filter about, let's say, by price range, by CPU manufacturer, by whatever you want to. But those things here are not, they are dynamically programmed. It's not something that, okay, there's no developer that come here and added exactly those filters, right? They didn't code exactly those filters. So it is something that is dynamically generated. And full text search engines, they do support those kind of things, those kind of facets. In our case, what we can do here is to come back and go back to our search here. Instead of search 6, let's go search 7. And now I'm just passing this parameter here, facets. Facets is just the filters that we get back from the interface to make sure that I do have receiving those filters, those parameters here, and then I will be filtering by them. So here on search 7, I am filtering the facets here. So if no, it's not empty, I have this add facet filter, which is essentially is just a for that filter by those facets that I'm sending. But if I come back here to search 7, if you want to return the facets as well, like say, okay, those are the things that you can filter for. All I have to do is to define this thing here. So as I'm saying here, I create a new hash map and say, okay, my facet is called genres, which is, let's say, a facet here called department in this case. And I want you to essentially run a distinct query to genres.name. And I want to limit to, let's say, 10 genres, right? And the full text search engine will make kind of a distinct query on those genres.name here and show the results for me here. Let's say here they are limiting to 6 filters. So now if my query is already, no, it's not running yet. But that's pretty much it. Like, that's yet another advantage of using full text search, because it does that automatically for you. So hopefully if we come back here to our search and we go back to, we duplicate the result again and we search for Star War, it will appear this thing here called filters. And when I click here, you say, okay, yeah, now I am searching for Star War, but I want a comedy here, right? And you see, okay, How About Chicken is a comedy. No, I want something like a documentary. And yeah, this here is a documentary about full text, about Star Wars. And guys, that's pretty much how you can build a very advanced Google-like full text search inside Couchbase. There are many things I would like to talk about, which is how you can understand user intent and how you can change the weights according to what the user is searching for. So on Google, if you're searching for 1 + 2, you understand that you are trying to calculate something, and then you need to understand that and change your ranking factors. But that's pretty much it. Worth to highlight that in our case, our search here is very sensitive to black hatting. So if, let's say, someone writes, we have a description that has Star Wars 100 times in the description, it will affect a lot our score. But in some, that's why, let's say on Amazon and other places, they have this, you have to review, someone reviews your advertisements just to make sure that you are not tricking the search algorithm. There are some further readings that I would like to recommend to you guys. One of them is definitely relevant search and thumbnail text. And of course, I recommend you guys to check the Believe search, which is the engine that we use under the hood. And you can do everything that you see here on Capella as well. So that's what I had for today. I hope you guys like it, and thank you very much.
Dennis, that was amazing. To start out with, it looks like, you're building like pretty much you're building Netflix in the search engine that Netflix uses. And I mean, you did it like in 20 minutes. Now, of course, you did have some code already pre-generated, but really, even just looking at the code, I was just fascinated by like how quickly you could get something up and running in Couchbase with this. I didn't have to worry about like, how do I get my content into like Elastic or Solar? I didn't have to worry about like, how do I update that content and the performance hits and all the infrastructure, right? And when you're a developer, all that stuff, it just takes away from you delivering product. These are things that the end user doesn't see, right? The end user doesn't see that when they search inside your app. What they see is the results. And they honestly really don't care as long as the results are what they're looking for, right? And so when I look at this, I look at that going, this is pretty cool because, one, you're using Couchbase. It's just already have it. If your database is already in Couchbase, you already have this. And that's the thing I think that I want to kind of mention is this requires no extra software. If you have Couchbase Server or Capella, this is built in. It's not like you have to add in an additional thing. This is just there. You just basically start using it. And that is super awesome compared to the world of trying to build this, but having to build a bunch of other stuff. And like you said, all that other infrastructure and stuff. Extremely fascinating, folks. I highly recommend you check out the links that Dennis shared out. And if you're interested in search, I mean, obviously, Dennis, you're available on Twitter. We're more than happy to have conversations with you. You can contact me if you want. Also, and I can get you in contact with Dennis. And if you're just curious about search in general, we love talking to developers about cool things. So please ping us on social media, and we'll be more than happy to have a conversation with you. With that, I do want to kind of flip things over and talk a little bit about testing. Now, Dennis, I know you talked about it a little bit, and you talked about our test area. We have our area in GitHub. It's called Couchbase Examples. And honestly, I have to give you all credit for it, because when I started at Couchbase in April, we're going to do a little time machine here and go backwards in time. We had a very serious conversation, and the team was pretty small back then, to tell you the truth. There was only 3 of us. But we looked at the value of what tutorials are, and we looked at, like, when do they go wrong? When is it's the user experience, right? You described in search. The user experience has to be the point where the person's looking for something, and they kind of just in 2022 expect it to happen. If you search in Google and you type in Star Wars, you would expect Star Wars to show up, right? Well, in 2022, people use tutorials and they just expect them to work. Developers expect to grab a tutorial and it's going to work. It's going to solve their problems. And maybe they're using it to learn Couchbase, or maybe they're using it for basis of their POC. Either way, it's got to work. And that's the expectation. And we need to make that happen at Couchbase. We need to guarantee that our tutorials always work. And so I would like to talk to you guys a little bit about some ways that we went around doing that. And I'm going to focus today on mobile, only because I've been working on those tutorials lately. But honestly, the things I'm going to show you with mobile almost work the exact same way for our full stack tutorials that we're using for building things like Node APIs or ASP.NET APIs or Python, whatever language you pick, whether it's Java, we have tutorials for those things. I want to show you a concept that we have and what we're kind of going through and doing. So with that, I'm going to grab and open my screen here, and I'll take over here real quick. So let's see here. I'm going to have my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and see if I can get this slideshow to start, and we'll get ourselves running here. So hopefully everybody can see my screen, and I can get ourselves stuff running here. So once again, for everybody that doesn't know me, my name is Aaron Lebeau. I'm a developer advocate at Couchbase, and I'm here to talk to you today about how we are looking at automating tutorials and testing our tutorials. This is really critical for us to test tutorials in the cloud. We don't want to test these locally. We want these to automatically run. And we want to use technology that we already have. We don't want to recreate the wheel. So we're going to be using things like Github Actions, Visual Studio App Center, and Xcode Cloud. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. Now, if I kind of look at our previous model that we have, when we look at tutorials, we made some assumptions. We basically, we're writing our tutorials for a very specific version of Couchbase Server, the SDK, or for Couchbase Lite and its SDK. Our tutorials were usually updated on a cycle of, if there was a major release of a product or a new feature that came out, we wanted to go through and then schedule a tutorial update. And that's how the team that wrote the tutorials was doing it. What we did, though, is we kind of made the assumption that if there's an SDK update from the platform, say, for example, iOS comes with an SDK update, and we'll say that that's like iOS 14 to 15, or even worse, Apple's, like, for example, 14 to 14.1. We made the assumption that those wouldn't break our tutorial. We also made the tutorial, we made the assumptions that even if a platform change, Google comes out with a new version of Android, that our tutorials would probably still work. And then, even worse, we made the assumption that when the IDE comes out new versions, that the tutorials will probably still just work. All these assumptions are wrong. And honestly, a lot of times these break. And they break for various reasons. Anybody that's been doing mobile for a long time will know the wars that you've fought over the years. I can tell you just ungodly stories of iOS 8 to 9 and the camera breaking, or the camera breaking again in iOS 10 because they required the description field, which I'll get into in a little bit. The way that we access disk changed between iOS 9 and 10. And so there's every single time Apple or Google even makes changes, Apple's not the only person, Google does also. This can absolutely break everything in the universe. And so then our tutorials break. And that is frustrating, not only to people that wrote the tutorial like me, because I didn't know the tutorial broke, but to you as a user that's coming in trying to use my tutorial. And that it's not helping either one of us, right? If I have a tutorial I wrote and it's broke, I want to fix it. And if you are trying to use the tutorial, you want the assumption and the trust model that it just works. And so we started thinking about this, and this is the conversation I was telling you about I was having with Dennis when I first started at Couchbase. And we had to step back and say, but wait a minute, isn't a tutorial just code? And really it is. So what do regular mobile development teams use to solve this problem? And honestly, mobile development teams and apps survive these things without problems. Well, the answer is very clear, and that's automation. And so that's what I'm here to talk to you about today is how we looked at tutorials and we want to change the way we think about tutorials to think of them more as code. And we want to think of them more as how can we guarantee our tutorials always work and guarantee that when you go get it, it's going to not have distractions, I like to call them. Things like compiler warnings or things that basically, if you start changing the code, you're not really sure what broke it. Is it something that was already there or is it something that you changed that broke it? And so with that, let's take a look at the agenda, what I have for today. So first, I'm going to give you an overview of some technology that you may or may not know about. Things like Visual Studio App Center, which is a pretty cool thing, and how it does automated testing. I'm also going to talk a little bit about GitHub Actions because they're one of my favorite things to use. We're going to look at, can I set up an automated test inside of App Center using, like, for example, an Android application, look at the results and see what's there. And then I'm going to flip over to iOS and talk about something brand new. It's in beta still, but I do want to talk about it a little bit because it is important to people, and that's Xcode Cloud and iOS. And finally, we're going to end it up, and I'm going to give you a comparison and at least share some of my thoughts. I've been doing software development for about 27 years, as you all know, and have ran mobile teams for about 8 to 10 years now. And so I've got a lot of experience in this and using these kind of tools. And I can at least give you like what I would look at and when I'm comparing these things to see, what should you possibly be taken away from this, which is, automated testing is pretty awesome. So let's get started. Let's talk about App Center for a few seconds, and then we'll roll over and we'll start going through and showing you some real world examples of our tutorials running with these unit tests. So what is App Center to start out with? Well, Microsoft makes App Center. I'm going to start out with that, but they didn't write it. It turns out App Center is many different products that Microsoft bought over a period of time. Now, one of those apps was called Hockey App, and Hockey App was a distribution app. Now, you're probably saying, but Aaron, why do we need this? Because don't we have like Test Flight and don't we have Google Play Beta? Do we really need this? You're not wrong. However, this was created back in 2011 and 12, back when we didn't have those services. Remember, Test Flight and Google Play Beta are relatively new services from both platforms. So before that, we had no way of distributing our app to testers for testing our apps. So App Center really, its heart and soul came around from Microsoft buying Hockey App and bringing that in. And honestly, even with at both Google Play and with Test Flight for enterprise development teams, where they're not releasing their apps to the enterprise stores, they're releasing them locally. These being able to distribute your apps to local testers in your company and controlling the security of that's something that honestly is a little bit painful inside of Google Play and Test Flight. The example is, for example, Apple has to go through and review your app before it can go to Test Flight. And that could be a 24-hour window. Well, if you're using App Center, for example, you could just ship that app out there and it's instantly available for your QA testers to test or for your automated test to run. And that is a story that is pretty great. That means that if there is a problem, your turnaround time to fix it is going to shrink because of the fact that it's getting to the testers faster. So there's something to be said about the value of having App Center or some other service similar to it, distributing your apps for your testers again. Now, of course, the thing I want to talk about today is about this automated testing in the cloud, because that really excites me. Now, that is also something that did not exist in Hockey App, and Microsoft did not write. That came from when they purchased Xamarin. And Xamarin had a product called Xamarin Test Cloud. And this allowed you to test your mobile applications regardless of how you wrote them. I want to call it out because you see the word Xamarin, you're going, well, this is only for Xamarin apps. Not true. You can write your app in Cordova. You can write it as a native application. It works. So it's regardless of what platform you wrote it in, you could basically send your application up with a test harness and you can run it on a physical device in the cloud. Holy cats, is that awesome? That is just amazing. Because think about it, I don't have the money to buy a bunch of these phones, especially in 2022 where we're all working from home or remotely. You can't just ship to your QA person 50 Android phones to test all these different versions. That doesn't make sense, right? So because of that, we need to figure out a way, can we automate against devices in the cloud and save us time and money? We can hit more devices, which means we have more vote of confidence that our code and our apps work. So that's what the App Center is bringing to the table. Now, App Center also has a ton of features, and I don't have time to talk about all those. We're going to just focus on the test feature. But I should probably mention, just so you quickly understand, that there's all kinds of other features. The one thing I want to give you the caveat of, and this is Aaron, a friend to all my friends here watching, is that I don't recommend you use the build feature. And I'm just going to flat out say it. It's not the world's best build feature. And if you are using GitHub, you're using Azure DevOps, you're using Bitbucket or GitLab, just use their build, their CI/CD pipeline feature, because it's going to work better. It's already built into the place you're storing your code, and you're going to have more functionality over it. That is my personal opinion, and I really believe that if you follow that and you do the research yourself, you'll probably come to the same conclusion that I have come to with that. Personally, all my code's in GitHub, so today in our examples, we're going to be using GitHub Actions. Now, how can you write your tests? Because that's what everyone's like, whoa, wait a minute. You're telling me I can do automated testing in the cloud on real devices, but how? What's the restrictions? There's got to be a catch to this, Aaron, right? Not really. These are really designed where they run on the test frameworks you're used to running, at least for App Center. And for iOS, you have a couple different choices. I'm going to tell you right now, though, I highly recommend for each platform, you write in the test that the platform supports. So for example, in iOS, I would recommend that you use Xcode's UITests framework. For Android, I'd recommend you write in Espresso. In Xamarin, obviously, I'd recommend you write in UITests. And if you're asking for the question, why? Well, because each one of these platforms, they've spent a lot of money making those test frameworks really solid. And so because of it, they have a lot of built-in features that necessarily, and I'll give you the example of iOS. In Appium, if I'm using that platform, for example, that's something that's written in Java. And if I wrote the app in Swift, that means I'm switching language context to start out with, right? But in Xcode, it takes things like screenshots for you for free, if you understand how Xcode's testing framework works. And so when you're setting up your tests and you want to kind of go through and review the results of them, Apple's made it really easy to integrate in because of that you're already on that platform. And Espresso is the same thing. Espresso in modern Android development is actually a joy to write unit tests in. It's super easy to get functional tests running or integration tests up and running. And so because the friction is so much lower, because the companies that are building these things are basically putting so much money into it, it doesn't make sense to use a platform that is maybe third party that's coming in. And basically it's not maybe has all the features you're looking for, and it's going to be a little bit harder to build that. So let's take a look at what GitHub Actions brings to us, and how can we take our code, and we're going to start with a code repository, and how can we take a GitHub action, bring that into App Center, run some tests against it, and then view the results, because really that's where the awesome sauce is. Now, I like to draw diagrams. I like to explain to people technical things in pictures, because a lot of people are very picture focused. They like seeing things. So this is a very simple workflow diagram that would show you how this works. So if we look at this, we have some kind of change that happens in GitHub Actions, and this was really the same for any CI/CD pipeline. And CI/CD, for those that aren't a DevOps person, this is continuous integration and continuous delivery, which means we want to guarantee that we're constantly building our app when people check in code, and we're constantly testing it to guarantee that we can deliver that app without problems. Okay. So we want some kind of event to happen that triggers this GitHub action to go through and build our app and then test it. And in my example, I'm just going to say it's a change in the branch of code. So for example, somebody does a PR, they make a change to the code and they merge it into main. And when that happens, I want to kick off a test to guarantee that that code's good. Now, most people will actually do this on a PR. But since our tutorials don't change that often, I don't want to have actually the concept of having many different tests running all the time. And since our tutorials, for the most part, sit there, it makes more sense for us to probably even do these on something called a schedule. So the way that you will build your GitHub Actions will be different than ours, but not all that different. The thing to take away is the fact that you have options of what these events are that's going to happen when you fire a GitHub action. Okay. So what's going to happen then is that GitHub action is going to run what they call a workflow, or a bunch of things that you tell it to do. What we want our thing to do is the following. We'd like it to build a mobile app. Then we'd like to use a command line tool, a CLI tool, command line interface, to distribute that app up into App Center. And then we would like App Center to run that actual test and report back to us whether or not it worked or not. So it's something very, very simple. And with that, I'm not a fan of slides. I'm a fan of just showing off how things really work. So let's go through and do a real demo. We'll look at real code, and I'll explain to you this process. So I'm in our area that Dennis described earlier. This is the Couchbase examples area in GitHub. Now in here, we have all kinds of repos, and we have rules that come into this particular organization in GitHub. You have to have unit tests to get your code to make it into examples, because we want to guarantee to everybody, not only ourselves, but all of our clients and anybody viewing these repos, that we believe that these repos work, that they have been tested, and if you download the code and you follow the directions, they're going to work. So today, I would like to go through and talk about our Android standalone tutorial. This is a very simple Android Couchbase Lite tutorial. It's been updated recently by me to work with our new beta of Couchbase Lite 3.0, which has got some really cool features. Quick plug, if you haven't tried out the beta yet and you're a mobile developer, you really should, because it's got a lot of really cool things that it does. Quality of life of improvements for developers are in this beta, so please check it out. However, we're here to talk about guaranteeing that this tutorial continues to work. So how this works is inside of GitHub, I make a folder called GitHub. And inside of that folder, I have a folder called workflows. The workflows are going to be my GitHub actions that are going to run. When I click in there, I have a standard, what we call YAML file. Now, to those of you that are new to DevOps and stuff, a YAML file kind of is like this hybrid between somewhere of kind of like XML and JSON had a kid, and it spit out this. It's a markup language when it comes down to it. It's very finicky. I'm not going to lie to you when it comes to spacing. You have to have spacing perfect in YAML. So if you're new to YAML, you want to use something like VS Code, like Visual Studio Code, and you want to get a YAML plugin or whatever IDE you're using. Make sure you have a YAML plugin if you're building these files, so that it will tell you if the spacing's right or not. It's a pro tip, and I promise you, I can't tell you how many times I've had workflows fail just simply because I forgot the right amount of spaces. But let's describe what happens here. And so you can get an idea of GitHub Actions. So in here, we're triggering. We're saying run this workflow on when somebody pushes to the main branch. And that's what we currently have today. Now, this one right here, you're saying, well, what does that do? Well, workflow dispatcher means I can manually run this workflow anytime I want by hand, by just going to GitHub, going into the actions part, and just telling it to run. And so by adding that, that's a little pro tip. You can basically make it so you can run your workflows whenever you want. There's also something called Cron, and that's how you would schedule something. And that's my recommendation, and that's what we do in our other tutorials. We're not ready to do that here because I'm fixing something, but eventually these will have something called Cron on them, and that will run them on a regular basis. Now, I'm going to not get into every single part of this because it can get pretty deep, and I want to kind of save enough time to show iOS also. But I want to kind of tell you right now, the build runs for Android on Linux, and we tell that by saying it's going to run on this virtual machine. We're to give it a version of Node that we want to run on. And the simple reason why we're using Node is that a lot of GitHub Actions use Node to run. Most GitHub Actions have these little tiny little like mini programs, think of them, that are written in JavaScript. But also the App Center CLI is a Node package. So it's a CLI tool, but it really runs on Node. So it's written in JavaScript. And we need to use the App Center CLI to not only upload our build that we're going to do to App Center, but then we have to tell App Center to run the tests, and we do both that via that CLI command line. Since that requires Node, we have to have Node installed. You can see here that when we go through and look at this, we're going through and getting Node, and we're running a step that does this right here. This is a built-in action to set up Node, and it takes in the version number, which I described above. And then we install the App Center CLI tool. And for that, I just run a command line tool. NPM, it stands for the Node Package Manager. For most mobile developers, you may not know that, but it's just like a package manager. It's no different than like Gradle or Maven for Android developers. In .NET, we have something called NuGet. And in Apple's world, we have a couple different ways, CocoaPods, and the new way is just to use GitHub repos. But no matter what, these are just packages we grab and download and install. We need the JVK. because we need to be able to compile this. And no matter what, Android apps are still JDK based. So we're going to need a version of that. So I get 11. And 11's a pretty modern stable. It's not the latest version, but it's a version that works really well with the latest versions of Android and with Gradle. So I'm going to grab that. And then I just tell it to build. There's a couple built-in open source GitHub Actions for building Gradle apps that I'm just using. I didn't write these, but that's the power of GitHub Actions, that there's so many open source GitHub Actions out there. I can just go search for one. Hey, I want to build an Android application. Go search and find which ones are available, read a blog article a little bit, and then implement that, and it works pretty well. I will highlight out here that during the build process, I am running currently as a debug build in Android. And that's so that I can get messages, more detailed messages on if the build doesn't work, what's going wrong. Now, for you, if you're doing your apps, and these are real apps going to the App Store, you may want to change this over to release mode. This is something that your development team will have to talk about, and the advantages and disadvantages of doing that to make a decision. Because just remember, when you do a difference between release and debug, things like instruments work differently. Performance works differently because the compiler compiles the app differently. And so you're going to get mileage of differences, especially if you look at instruments, between a debug and a release build. And that's kind of common sense for most people. So then we go through and we have to sign it. And people say, well, wait a minute, this is not iOS. Why are you signing in user certificates? That doesn't matter. It's still, both platforms have to do this. You have to sign your applications. And here's the tricky part about doing automated testing. You don't have one app. You actually have two. What? Yes, when you do UI testing or integration testings on a mobile app, you're going to have the app you build, but then you have the test harness or the app that connects to the app and runs the test that you want it to run. So you're not building one app, you're building two. The app that you built, and then your test harness app that's actually running all the tests against that app and connects to the app. And so you'll notice here in my GitHub action, I go through and I have two different definitions for signing. I have one for the main app, and then one also for the test harness app. Now, really, the magic that happens here is right here, these two commands. These two commands for App Center actually, actually, there's one more right here. This command right here uploads the app to App Center. It's a very basic command. It just goes through and tells it, hey, I want to do a release build. Here's some tokens to talk to App Center. Those are the security things. Here's the place I want to put it in App Center. That's what we call a slug. And who the group of people, the collaborators that can actually use this app. We give it a file, we give it a couple of small pieces of notes and stuff, and that will automatically upload the build to App Center. And then the two commands down here actually run the tests themselves. And we do that by saying App Center test, run. And these are espresso tests. I'm going to say espresso. I've got to give it that token. That's a security key that says that I am who I am. We tell it which app to run. And this is where we have a difference in these two commands is devices. In App Center, you can run on physical devices, and there are literally hundreds of them you can run on. I am cheap, and so for our test right now, I'm running on what I like to consider the high and low. I take the lowest phone, that is the cruddiest phone I can think of that they have available, and I run a test against it. And for this example, it's going to be an Android 5.11 phone. It's a Samsung phone. It's an S6, but by standards today, it was released over 7 years ago, and it's really slow. And it's running a really old version of Android. And I want to run a test also against a really awesome phone, like a Google Pixel 3. I don't want to run against the latest Pixel. I just want to run on a recent hardware running recent OS. So that second phone I'm going to run on is a Google Pixel 3 XL running Android 11. The theory is if it works on the lowest version and it works on the highest version, it probably works in between. Now, this is just a strategy. Your testing strategy and the devices that you want to test on will differ than ours. And eventually, we'll probably have 4 devices in total, honestly, in Android we test. We'll probably test the last couple of major releases on different screen sizes to guarantee it works. And then we'll still do that cruddy test of a really crappy phone with really low specs just to guarantee that experience still works. So that's our GitHub action. All this has to do is then run. And when this runs, the stuff shows up in GitHub. So with that, let me go back to our presentation here. So I'm going to go back from our current slide. And I know I didn't talk about iOS that much. And I'm going to talk about iOS with Xcode. So I'm not going to cover that hugely here. I'm going to say the following. iOS works almost like Android. The only difference is that you need to read iOS's documentation. And I have a couple links here. And these slides will be available afterward for you to go ahead and grab. I'll put a link out to where they are. The reason for this is how iOS does builds. Okay, iOS has a rule as app developers that you only can run tests on devices that have been approved by Apple. This is for certain types of releases. Okay, so if you're doing a release to the App Store, you only can test on 100 devices, or you have to use TestFlight. Now, in this world, you don't want to use either of those, right? You're not going to the App Store, you're just going to App Center, and you want to run on their devices. So because of this, it is possible to do. However, you have to make sure that your build is a developer signed build. That means you have to use a developer certificate with an app profile that is based off a developer certificate. If you follow these two rules, what ends up happening is that developer builds are different than release builds or production builds or enterprise builds. They allow those to be re-signed with a different certificate. So when you upload the iOS app to App Center, it will re-sign your application with one of their certificates. And then their certificates are trusted by their devices, which means your test can run against their devices in the cloud. So this is absolutely possible. And I'm not trying to make it sound tricky because it really isn't, as long as you understand the rules. I highly, highly, highly recommend, if you don't know what I'm talking about, but you want to do this, read the documentation. And of course, I'm on Twitter. And if you have questions, you can always hit me there. I'm more than happy to help you out and answer any questions you may have on this process. I realize for new developers, this part's the part that nobody likes to talk about. But let's take a look at results in App Center, right? Because we showed the GitHub action, but where's the proof in the pudding that this thing is actually worth your value? Well, if we do that, let's go take, I'm logged into App Center right now. Now, App Center is a cool service. It plugs into your OAuth providers. So if you're using GitHub for your identity, or if you're using Azure DevOps, whatever that is, your corporate IT company can come in and set up your App Center so that it uses your credentials for your company so that your apps are secured. It does that pretty well. I mean, most Microsoft services do this. I've got a bunch of lists of apps here. We're going to focus on the one we looked at that GitHub action with. And that was this standalone test. Now, how I found out was I just clicked on the list here. And then from there, I clicked on this test button and said, show me the test runs. Now, first of all, value instantly, it shows some instrument stuff. We can see how much memory the app was using during the entire time that the test ran. On top of that, we see very quickly that, wow, this thing is running and the tests are passing. And if I want to look at the details, I can click on any of the tests. I can see that they test. I can see how long they ran. And I can see how much memory they used. And in fact, if I want, I can drill into the details of a test, and it will show me all the steps of the test took on the device it was running on. So in this particular test was run on that Google 3, XL running Android 11, like I showed you earlier, on a 6-inch screen. This phone's a couple years old, but it's pretty much a pretty popular Google Pixel phone. Every part of the test that is running, the test is taking a screenshot so I can see what's going on. I can make sure the test is validating that what it should be doing is actually doing. And this checks in with my code that I wrote for both not only my integration test, but my functional tests. What this app does is basically allows you to build a user profile, save it to a database, and then we log out and log back in to validate that the information you saved to the database is still there on the screen. And that's what this test does. And it works great, which means now if you were to download this tutorial and you follow the directions, I'm pretty confident that tutorial would work for you. And that's pretty cool. However, there's a reason why we need these kind of tests. And I want to point that out, because just because your code passes on one version of Android doesn't mean it'll pass on all of them. Here is an example of a different tutorial, our query tutorial that I rewrote in Android. And you'll see here, this looks kind of weird. Wait a minute. One of Aaron's tests are failing, but one of them are passing. How is that even possible if it's the same code, right? Well, remember when I stepped back a little bit ago and told you that, things change between releases of OSs, and there's all these other things in mobile that make it super hard to guarantee your apps are going to work great. And you, as app builders, you know this pain already, right? Well, this just happens to be one of those pains. And it's my ignorance when I wrote the test. It's my code. I'll take fully responsibility for this test not working. So why didn't it work? Well, if we look at what worked, I can kind of predict it. It's probably the new Pixel phone. And sure enough, the new Pixel phone's working. Because this test is different. This app does something different. There's the ability to search for universities in this app. So it's not the same app as the prior one I showed you. But I wrote it. I know a pretty good idea of what's going on with this app and the test on it. So why would the other one fail? Well, it's not failing on the functional test. It's failing on an integration test. Here comes the truths of testing on real devices versus your computer. If you're using an emulator on your laptop, the speed of which the device that you're emulating is the speed of your hard disk. And so when I was developing this test, I was developing with emulators on my laptop. And the disk performance, and since Couchbase Lite is a heavily IO-based system, the database sits on the mobile device on disk. We do a lot of writing and reading from disk. When I ran these on my local machine, they ran super fast. Not a problem whatsoever. However, pushing the tests to the cloud, and I started doing heavy IO traffic, started to realize there's a delay in my integration tests of how long it takes before one action can be done and another action starts. And in this tutorial, very specifically, there's not one database, but two databases. And it is a timing issue between me making the assumption that I can use one database for doing search testing and another database to write the profile stuff. I basically have to add a delay in my integration test to have it wait for the database to close, because I have something called a pointer in the database. I can, in Couchbase Lite, you could basically put a pointer and say, hey, anytime the database changes, send an event out to me so I know about that. Well, if I close the database, all those things have to be removed, and that can take time, and it can take a considerable amount of time. Well, I miscalculated how much that time did, and I didn't put a delay into that, and very ignorantly made the assumption that the database had closed and I could just reopen it again right away. And that's not true. And so this is really goes to prove, though, why you need integration tests and why you need functional tests, because they show you things in your code that end users could run into. This would literally cause my app to crash if an end user was using this version of my app on that platform. And this would happen to you if you're developing your apps too, right? Well, the whole theory is with these aren't designed to fix your problems. They're designed to show you where your problems are so you can fix them. And that's why I love automated testing with this. So I already know the fix for this. I didn't put it in because I knew I was doing this talk, and I wanted to show that off to you and show you these are the things you can kind of run into. Now, with that, let's go back to our slides again. And I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about Xcode Cloud. So I know that we're running short on time here, but I do want to kind of get into that a little bit and talk about it. Now, Xcode Cloud, what is it? Xcode Cloud is Apple's full CI/CD pipeline solution, and it also supports automated testing, and it's built very specifically for apps you build in Apple's world. If you're living in the Apple world of iOS, iPadOS, macOS, tvOS, watchOS, Xcode Cloud is designed for you. It is built into the IDE, just like most things in Apple's world, where the theory is that developers' workflow will be improved because of the fact you don't have to leave your IDE. It's also currently, at least in its current beta, has zero code in it. There's no YAML. There's no language you have to learn. It's point and click magic like Apple does. Now, with that, I would say that always, and even in Apple's world with point and click, I'm an iOS developer, love Swift, love building iOS apps. I also write Android apps. I'm equal opportunist. I'll write in any mobile platform someone tells me to. However, I'll say that in Xcode, if with App Center and a GitHub action, I have infinite amounts of flexibility. I could do all kinds of crazy things that my heart can content. If I have an idea, I probably could do it, right? In Xcode Cloud, the problem is going to be is it's very limited in its functionality because you're doing what Apple wants you to do. And so because of the fact you don't have the ability to write YAML code or those kind of things, the workflows are going to be limited what you can do. However, even though these rough edges exist, it's still a pretty amazing thing to see in action. And so because of that, I wanted to cover that to tell you that we're looking into this. We literally have some of our tutorials running on this. And so far in the beta that we've seen, it's pretty amazing. Aaron's going to come out and say that I like it a lot. So here I've got one of our iOS. This is a tutorial I recently updated for Couchflix Lite Beta 2. Once again, go check that out. This is our query beta. So it's very similar to the Android version of the app. And in this one, I went through and changed out the UI, got it to modern versions of Swift so it runs on Xcode 12 and 13. I made some modern changes to the UI kit stuff so that it uses constraints and all those kind of stuff properly. And I wrote unit tests against it. And those tests are very simple. I mean, I'm not going to go through here and say that they're really complicated. Anybody that's written Xcode test before will see that this code is very basic. doing very basic functional and integration testing. Nothing that I'm trying to break the bank here with. Now, how do you get to Xcode Cloud? So one, you have to be signed up for the beta, and that's an organizational thing. So your organization, when you log into the Apple developer account, you have to go in and you have to sign up for this. Our organization did, which is why I have access to it. So that's the very first thing. That's going to be a breaker for some of you if you haven't signed up for this beta. But it's actually free right now. They haven't announced pricing yet on it, but currently it is free for testing. And I highly recommend your team do take a look at it because its advantages may outweigh the cons to it. So I told you earlier, it's available in an IDE, and it really is. We click on the very last button here in Xcode, and this little button right here. You get to be able to see your local, and this is what you're used to seeing, your local build status, but also your cloud build status. What? Oh, this is pretty neat. Let's take a look at that. So you'll notice here I have two definitions under my project, one for Xcode latest and one for Xcode 12x. One of the cool things about this is it allows you to run on multiple versions of Xcode. What? Yeah, it does. So what you can do is you can just go to your app here. So I'm going to click at the very top. And you'll see here I have my two breakdowns of Xcode 12x versus the latest. And when I click on these and I go to edit workflow, this is the workflow engine they have. They give you where is your code hosted, and they support GitHub repositories without problems. It will install a little GitHub app into your GitHub organization. That's something you'll have to get set up, but it's pretty painless, and it's no different than setting it up with App Center. The cool thing is you have environment variables you can set, but you also could set not only the Xcode releases, but also the macOS releases. So you can have tests running against, and since you have multiple of these, you can have multiple tests running against beta versions of Xcode, the current stable version of Xcode, prior versions of Xcode. This means you know when Apple puts a beta out, whether or not your product works or not. Think about that for a second. If you can set up automated workflow that tells you, hey, the next version of Xcode, our stuff doesn't work anymore, that's pretty great. That means that you almost have a time machine because you now know that you need to go fix it before that thing ships. That's something that it is a quality improvement to be able to have a product, the data Xcode ships, and your product just works on it. So the ability that you could do this and have these multiple different types of tests, have multiple versions of Xcode running in the same workflows, Aaron's giving it a thumbs up. That's pretty cool. So you can also set up, like I said, macOS version. So maybe your shop is running an older version of macOS X for security reasons. You can set up what version of macOS X you're going to run. Now, of course, it's only going to support the versions that Apple supports. So this is something to be known. Apple really only supports Xcode 13 and 12. So if you're a shop that's using Xcode 11, I would question you, why are you using that? That is something Apple very clearly does not support officially. And honestly, you probably should move over to this because bug fixes, quality of life improvements, Swift language improvements, there's a lot of reasons for that. For branch changes, this works just like it did in our GitHub Actions. We could say, hey, what causes us to do this build? Is it a branch change? And so what we're saying right now in this one is just like in the GitHub action, if code gets merged into main, we want to go through and run this particular workflow. And you could also do set up other custom actions. You basically go into the start conditions here. You'll see here that there's tag changes. There's other things you could do. I'm showing you the core basics here. Now, finally, once this happens, I could tell this to run on tests. Now, here is the real cool thing. You can run on as many simulators as you want. So you see here, I'm actually testing against multiple simulators. I have an iPhone 8 running on iOS 14.5. I've got one that's running iPhone 13 running on 15, which is the latest. But I also go back to 14.2. These are, and I run on a very small phone screen, an SE. That's a very small screen. And a lot of times in iOS world, we want to test on the biggest screens, like the Mac screens, but we also want to run on the SE screens just to make sure that our app doesn't have glitches in the UI. That's going to cause it where the user can't use it because the button's hidden or something like that, or scroll isn't working right. There's a lot of reasons you want to test your apps in various screen sizes. And these tests work. They're pretty cool. So as you can kick them off anytime you want. You can just go into your test, say kick it off, and it'll kick off against all these different devices. But what I also have is this one because we want to support the older version of Xcode, Xcode 12. So if I go to edit workflow here, the one thing I do want to point out is that we're running on iOS 13 devices because Xcode 12 supports both iOS 14 and 13. So I'm doing a test against not only the oldest version of iOS that this tutorial will work on, which is iOS 13, I'm covering 14 on Xcode 12, and then on Xcode 13, I'm covering iOS 14 and 15. I've got my total coverage of the platforms I want to support set up in these tests. Now, the last thing I want to kind of show you is warnings. They're my Achilles. I used to be a tech lead for like 5 or 6 years, and I used to tell developers warnings are the worst things. If I see a warning, I pull your code and there's warnings, I'm going to ask you why they exist, because the compiler trying to tell you something's not right. And we do have 2 warnings here, and it's really actually kind of silly, these warnings, if you look at them. But yeah, I do want to kind of highlight those out, that I've done everything I can to kill the warnings. This one just happens to be because the difference between iOS and 13, there is a button color difference in the background color. And that was a change between iOS 13 and 14. Technically speaking, the app still works, but it's giving you a warning that, hey, you know what? This platform's built for Universal, but it seems like that color's for iOS. Well, this is only mobile apps, but in Universal, it would build for Mac also. So for this particular warning, it's the only warning we get. If you look at the other builds over on Xcode 13, it doesn't even say these anymore. I'm okay with that. I know for a fact that, yes, even though I built an asset catalog that was universal, I don't have a Mac OS program on this one, so I really don't care. This particular warning will go away with time because Apple has changed the way that we do these things. So it's only going to be on super old versions of that. I don't like the warning, but I'm willing to live with it. But that's the only warning we're getting when we build. No compiler errors, no warnings. And this is what we need. We need the abilities so that to run these. Now, what's the advantage of this for us, right? Where's the value add that's coming to our team? Because that's something that people are going to ask me. They're going to say, well, Aaron, that sounds like you just did a lot of work, but really, where's the value add? So, value add very simple. One, when you come to our website, our developer website specifically, and you use a tutorial, it needs to just work. We understand that in 2022, especially, developers are in a shortcoming. Most teams are working with less team members that they need. A lot of times they're working with projects that still haven't said, oh, you have less developers, so we'll do less work. No, teams have to pick up more. Most people are working remote these days, which means there's this thing called Zoom fatigue, where you're in the meetings all the time and they're constantly just kind of driving you down. So developers, there's a lot of challenges being a developer right now today in this world, unfortunately. We want to make sure that our tutorials have the least amount of friction, that you can come in. We want with confidence that they work. You can grab them, you can run them, they work great. The tests run on them. And you can see even then how not only we're doing our tutorials on how to build Couchbase, but as a bonus, how we're testing those. And if you're not currently doing these kind of tests, all that code's available. You can go look and see exactly how we did it. You can run the unit test yourself, in fact. But this also means as new versions of Xcode comes out, as new versions of Android comes out, as new versions of the OS comes out, we can instantly run and test against beta versions of those. And we know ahead of time if our tutorials are broken or not, and we can fix them before you notice them. There's nothing more embarrassing as a developer than when something breaks and it's the end user that tells you about it. And we're all mobile developers, right? We're all been developers and we've been in that boat before, and it's not great. It's not a great experience, right? So with this, I want to kind of just summarize what you learned today from this talk. So one, App Center allows you to test against real mobile devices in the cloud. And you can test against iOS and Android devices with many different platform versions. App Center has been around for over 5 years. It's a tested and tried solution. Even when it was Xamarin Test Cloud, it was pretty good. I've used it at very large companies, and I can give you a thumbs up, 2 thumbs up, that it works pretty rock solid. I've never once had problems with it. There's other products out there that I have also tried. Things like Perfecto, which is really great but expensive, and Amazon has its device farm, and I had some problems with that. Now, you may not. So when I say App Center is pretty great, it's really up to you to go look at all the other products and make your decision based on your research on which one works for you. By no means do I say just because it works for us, it does work for you. But I'm telling you that there are solutions out there that you probably should be looking into if you're not doing this. Now, Xcode Cloud is pretty amazing. It's in beta. I want to kind of summarize that, right? To warn you, it is an Apple beta. It's still rough around the edges, but it took me less than a couple hours, and I had some pretty great tests running, and I didn't have to write any code. And I'm running against multiple Xcode versions. And that alone is worth the value of it just coming along for the test and be able to give Apple feedback on it. Now, I will say that it is in beta and there's no pricing available. So, it may be the coolest thing, but then this Fallout releases and it costs $1 gazillion to use. Well, then we'll probably end up going back to App Center, right, for iOS testing. However, I'm at least keeping my eyes open and extremely optimistic that this could possibly be a solution for iOS people for testing. At Couchbase, we're all about being modern. We tell you that in our tagline, we're the modern database platform. When we look at technology, we also try to be modern. We also try to keep our eyes open. And we want to make sure that the things that we're using and the tools we're using to build things are also modern. And so that's the reason why I wanted to talk about Xcode a little bit, because it is a modern way of doing this. And for many developers, it probably will be, I can't predict, but I'm going to say there's a good chance it could be the default standard for doing builds for iOS and Mac apps in the future. So that's what I got for you guys today on this. I know it's been a little bit long of a talk today, but I want to bring Dennis back on and thank him very greatly for coming in and hanging out with us. And most people don't know, Dennis is, I can't say enough great things about him because, one, he's my boss, but two, more importantly, he's like one of my best friends. And Dennis sees things like I see them, which is, it's rare sometimes to get that where you're kind of in sync and stuff, but we have the same values. We really want to have a better experience for everybody, all developers, regardless if you're a Couchbase customer or not. I truly want to share my knowledge with you. We have some really cool things we're doing. We have cool things that you can go look at of how we're doing those, and you can gain knowledge from that. And honestly, if you want to stick around for the ride, I can show you really amazing ways that you can build your apps better using some of our solutions. That's what we're here to try to do and try to help you out with.
Thank you very much, Aaron. That was a really, really good talk. I guess it just shows how important we are, how we take serious our tutorials and our examples. So we are testing every single one of them. And I guess part of our job here at Couchbase is also to educate developers, right? We want, yes. I guess, at least... many developers are not old enough to remember how software development was before ORM frameworks. So where you had to add all those DAO classes by yourself. And one thing that I think is very interesting is how we used to have those old-time software developers that know the database pretty well.
Back and forward. Yeah, back and forward.
And I'm impressed how those things are become more rare today because of we had this we have all these abstractions on the top of the database, and I don't think this is with good eyes. Of course, it improved a lot our productivity, right? But when you talk about critical scenarios, when you need highly scalable applications, it's really important to understand how the database works. And that's one of the things that we are here for. We also are here to teach developers the internals of the database, and which at the end of the day, even though if you never use Couchbase, you still will become a better developer because you will consider all those things when you're developing and working, even with relational databases.
Absolutely. I can't agree with this more, right? And you get into a constrained device like a mobile phone, for example, right? Where battery life is a considerable thing, right? And if you're doing things that maybe aren't optimized, you're literally possibly killing a user of yours' personal device that they care about a lot. I mean, I've seen people like not pay attention to their families in restaurants and use their mobile phone. That's crazy to me to start out with, but that's a different conversation. The point I'm making is that unoptimized apps, especially on mobile, cost you, possibly users. If you're chewing battery life, if you're a slow performer, there's 100,000 apps on the App Store. They can find another app that does what you do, or they can find a website to do it, right? They don't need your app. And so especially in mobile, it's so critical, but it's everywhere. And I agree with you that this is the thing that I'm hoping that, we can help people understand that, this is instrumenting these things, testing, making sure your things work the way you do. Even like when you're going through the performance and you're talking about things like full text search and like all these things have advantages and disadvantages because the average developer would probably just do a like statement, right? And think they're done. And they didn't go through the exercise and go, well, wait a minute. does this really build a good experience? And is this the performance hit I want to take? Is there a better way to do this? And all I have to do is learn a couple things. I mean, I'm not trying to downplay your talk, but your talk was amazing because of fact it showed that really it wasn't a lot of scary checkboxes to go through and turn this from being a very simple SQL-like statement to something that is almost like Google, that powerful. And it wasn't that difficult that you set up. You need to learn these terms, don't get me wrong, right? But we're smart people. We could do that. That's amazing.
Thank you very much. And one thing I'm amazed with all the testing that we are doing with mobile, which shows how we are taking mobile very serious. We are not taking mobile serious before, but with the new versions of Couchbase Lite that are coming, this will it will make Couchbase Lite very competitive and very attractive compared to other options out there. But one thing that I would like to ask you is, okay, Couchbase Lite is not just for mobile, right? You can use Couchbase Lite on other devices as well. Can you just talk a little bit about that for the new people?
It's a misconception, right? It's something that I don't want to point fingers anywhere, right? There's a couple different reasons why this ends up happening. We do have a lot of marketing terms, and we call something called Couchbase Mobile. But Couchbase Mobile is a term. It's not really a product. Couchbase Lite is the product. And it's a light embedded database. And it has nothing to do with Couchbase Server either. That's the other thing I want to kind of mention is that they are so different in the technology standpoint. The only thing that they share is the name Couchbase. That's about it. Couchbase Lite is an embedded database platform, which means it works on not only mobile, but you could technically speak and write desktop applications for it. You can write them in .NET. You can write them in Java. Yes, we have a separate Java framework that allows you to write Java applications, desktop applications, embedded applications. And we also support IoT via C. So we have a very, very nice C API. And the whole entire Couchbase Lite engine is based on something called Fleece. And Fleece is the storage engine that we use. And the C API gives you access, very low access to the Fleece data engine. And that's how it stores things in the documents down to the disk level. And there's some very, very complicated computer science stuff that we don't have time to talk about today. But if you're curious, I can give you a GitHub repo and I could talk to you about it. That it shows us why we're using really interesting ways of doing pointers in order to get the performance we get from serialization, because that's where Fleece really has its power compared to almost anything else. It really comes down to how we serialize data down to disk. We could do it faster than just about anybody else because we got really smart about it. We hired some really, really ingenious developers that come up with this system that really works well. Think of it like this. A lot of times there are point of sale systems, right? They're kiosks that you have at somewhere, and these may run on a tablet or they may run on some kind of Raspberry Pi kind of based device, right? An embedded device. It's got a card reader for credit cards, and you want that to have an embedded database that automatically syncs up to your main distribution database that you're running all your point of sales and everything else off of. Couchbase Lite works well for that because if it's a tablet, we've got you covered. If it's an Android tablet, we've got a version of the SDK. If you're on an iOS tablet, like an iPad OS, we've got an SDK for that with Swift or Object-C if you're running older stuff. Technically speaking, both work. If you're running a Raspberry Pi, we have an IoT C library for you that also works. If you're running it on ARM64, there are some limitations in the IoT thing. This is new in Couchbase Lite 3. It is supported by certain versions of ARM64 and ARM32 processors. And you want to go to our docs website, docs.couchbase.com. And if you look at the C library, they'll give you the list of operating systems and libraries for that. And I know some people said, but wait a minute, why isn't it supported on all versions of Linux? Well, remember, Linux is just a kernel, but really the distribution comes with all the libraries and tools. And no matter what, we have a database that has things like security in it, so we need certain versions of things like OpenSSL, OpenSSH. There's just certain tools, and certain versions of those Linux distributions don't have those tool versions. And so when someone comes to me and says, well, I'm running on this really old version of Debian and your C library doesn't work, it's like, yeah, I'm sorry, but the tools we're using to compile, we're using newer tools because of security vulnerabilities a lot of times, right? And so that's the reason why we're supporting these newer versions of Linux. It doesn't mean that the source code isn't available. You could downcompile, But really, for most people, you probably want to be on a certain version of Linux that's secure, right? Especially if we're talking about IoT stuff. But Couchbase Lite is really misunderstood. I don't think people realize just how many cool things. I mean, I've literally got, one second here. This is an NVIDIA Jetson card. And I know because of my chroma key, it's not going to show up all that well. But this is a NVIDIA board, and this is based on a chipset that was in the original Tesla cars. And this is something that you literally can run Couchbase Lite on. You can literally run an embedded database. You can have AI, machine learning running on this device. You have it calculate all kinds of crazy stuff and spit that stuff out and sync it to a server-based platform using like Couchbase Sync Gateway with Sync Lite. So it's pretty cool to think that you could take this kind of technology and do just crazy things with it.
Okay, that's a good point. Like you just mentioned Tesla cars and all this sort of IoT devices. And what are the things that is special? How Couchbase Lite handles connectivity in general?
So Couchbase Lite is a offline first mode in the sense that you're talking to the database internally, and that's all you, as a developer, that's all you're talking to. You're basically doing your database queries against the database locally. Now, what ends up happening is there's something called the replicator. Think of the replicator like your best friend. And what you do with the replicator is you tell the replicator where is a server called the Sync Gateway server. The Sync Gateway server is going to be the server out in your infrastructure or the cloud somewhere that knows where the Couchbase server is. It can take documents from your local database and sync them to the cloud and get documents from the database server and bring them to your mobile device. And it does it with you doing nothing. All you have to do is basically tell the replicator, this server exists over here. Here's some credentials. Obviously, you need to have some security, right? So you'll have to add a username and password or a certificate. You'll have to have some way of authenticating against the Sync Gateway server. Then what ends up happening is the documents automatically sync, and we have things called revisions. Now, on the Sync Gateway server, you actually can have code that runs that makes decisions on what documents should go to different people. And there's a couple different ways you can set this up, but most of these they're called channels. And think of channels like groups. And so think of like if you're in the DA group, the developer advocate group, you want all the documents that have been on that channel or that group of people, right? We want to share those documents. I think of it like project management. If you're in team one and team one's assigned to work on these 5 tasks, then team one only needs to see those tasks. So you could build a channel for team one and say, only send team one these documents to their mobile phone. Because if you think about it, the Couchbase server, if you're at a company that has 100,000 people, there could be, 50 teams running, right? I don't need to see the documents for team 2 through 49. I'm on team 1. That's the only documents I care about on my mobile device. So we have the ability to filter those documents down to guarantee the documents are getting down to the mobile device are really the ones that you're going to use to make critical business decisions, or you're going to react on those, right? It guarantees that the data you're seeing is your data and your data only. Now, like I said, your mobile code doesn't have to do any of this. All you have to do is talk to the replicator, talks to the Sync Gateway server. It's a Sync Gateway server's job to figure all that out and send it back to your mobile device. Now, for each platform, this works a little bit different, but I'll give you an example in Kotlin. In Kotlin, we use something called flows. And flows are the ability to subscribe to dynamic streams. And they're like, think of it like a delegate event that basically can fire whenever something happens. So what you do is you subscribe and say, hey, I have a flow. And anytime new records come into the database, just tell me about it. Just tell me about it. And in my code, I can dynamically react to that and just update the code, the UI automatically. Think of it like this. The example, and I know that a lot of times, unless you see this code, you're like, oh, that sounds confusing. It's not really. Think about Twitter. Most people use Twitter, right? If you look at Twitter, there's usually, when new tweets come in, there's a link at the top that says 15 new tweets, and you click the button, and those 15 tweets just show up. That is the same technology. If you think about Facebook, if you go into Facebook, you're scrolling, and Facebook has that button at the top that says, hey, there's 15 new posts. That's the same magic technology, right? The database locally here is telling you there's new records. You don't want to just show those right away because that'd be a pretty jarring experience, right? Say, for example, I'm scrolling through my Twitter feed and I'm reading a tweet, and all of a sudden it scrolls down because 15 new tweets came in. Well, then I lost my place. I'm kind of mad. I'm like, wait, what happened to that tweet I was just reading? These new tweets came in. But it gives you the ability to understand that there's some documents, gives you the ability then to react to that, build a UI that people can react to that, and then load those documents in. And what this does is this means you never have to pull the refresh code. that refreshes the screen when the user pulls down, which is a common mobile pattern. You never have to write a REST API again. You never have to go to a REST API, try to figure out how to page things. All those things go away because you're just talking to the local database. And the API for it is pretty easy to use. I have to admit that it literally can take days and weeks of development time away from your project because you're no longer struggling with the REST API team and this and that. And then you may need a special API to get certain types of data, and that team is a different team, and it takes them 3 weeks to do that. It's just a mobile database. You have the data there. Everything is available for you to query. You don't have to wait on somebody else. You can get that data yourself on your team. And so I've worked at big enterprise companies, and that's the advantage. The advantage is basically streamlining the workflow so that you have the access to all that data on that device, and you can get access to it instantaneously. Now, of course, the final thing I will say is if you have no internet whatsoever, the database works offline. And they can make all the changes to the documents you want. And the second that the mobile app can detect that it's back online on the internet, it will automatically sync those documents. And that's what we have called revision numbers. Each document has a revision number in it. Obviously, from a computer science standpoint, we all know how this works. It goes to the sync gateway server, just like code. It checks the revisions, sees if there's a conflict. If there's a conflict, it can run special code to figure out who should win. Or you can take some default actions that we have for those winning things. But this is no different than as developers when we talk about like merging code and we have merge conflicts between revisions of code. It works exactly the same way in many ways. And for most people, there's pretty easy ways to kind of do this. Some people will say that the latest document wins. Some people will actually look at per field. It's really up to you. It's super flexible for you to decide how that works.
That's super cool. So essentially, for a newbie like me on mobile, it means that I can write everything locally on my app. I can read everything locally on my app as well. And Couchbase, like Sync Gateway in Couchbase Lite, will synchronize with the backend API. So I don't need to make a lot of REST calls anymore. I can just care about my app locally. And yeah, that's interesting. And I can still listen to events what I have in the database, right?
And so you can listen to not only database changes, but document changes. Say, for example, there's a very specific document. I'd give you the example as dashboarding apps. So if you're writing a dashboarding app and you have some, like, you're processing, you're showing graphs on the screen and stuff like that, as new data is coming in, and this is really, really useful for enterprise developers that are doing like executive dashboards on a mobile device. Well, this data is changing all the time, and they're looking at these numbers, and they're even like 5 minutes changes in the graphs are big business decisions get made. Well, you can literally say, I want a listener on that specific document. So as sync gateways send you constant updates, you're getting those events as they happen. The second it hits the phone, your code can fire, see that document updated, and dynamically update that graph. And so it's not only database changes, but you could literally specify it down to the document level so that you could build the most reactive UIs possible. And I can tell you, I've used something very similar to this when I built those kind of apps, those dashboarding apps, where leadership's making decisions literally on the hour of, like, do we need to bring more people in? Think about it like a store where you have a bunch of lines that people are checking out, and the queue is getting full, and there's a bunch of people waiting, and they need to get another person at the checkout aisle to lower the queue, right? Those are the kind of things that they're looking at the numbers and saying, geez, there was 5 people there 2 minutes ago, but now there's 15 people waiting to check out. I need to get 3 people on the floor. These are the type of apps that allow people to monitor this stuff in real time and make a decision at that store. Maybe it's your local grocery store, to say, I need to get 3 more people out to the checkout aisle. They may be in the back of the office. They may not even know this, but they can use things like machine learning. They have cameras in the store. They can see how many people are at the line. They can calculate that number out. They can send it to a mobile app or a tablet app, and they can then have management make a decision very quickly. We need more help. These are real world workflows that you could use these kind of things for, that does crazy cool things, that doesn't require like a bunch of time to build, because once again, you don't have all these REST APIs you have to worry about. You just need to know if you have the data. If you have the data, you can put it onto a mobile device and process it.
That's pretty cool. I guess Guden just asked if I speak Russian. Unfortunately, not. My wife, I actually speak very few phrases in Russian just to survive, because my wife is Russian, and a few days per year we come here just to visit then. So I can survive and answer a few and say a few phrases, but no. I'm Brazilian, so I speak Portuguese, somewhat Spanish, English, and a little bit of German as well, kind of intermediary German. Cool. Thank you very much, Aaron. Before we wrap up, I just have one small quick question.
Sure.
How do we ensure that, let's say, someone decompile my app and then change some code there and try to send some stuff to sync gateway? How do we change? Let's say I have a document that I want to change a document that is not supposed to be changed, right? And how do we validate that? Because in theory, I'm writing everything locally, and Couchbase is getting everything synchronized with the database backend.
So there's a couple different ways you can solve this. And the easiest way is that you'd probably have a field inside of the JSON document that has a status, right, of who can read and who can write to it. You can read those fields in, and then at Sync Gateway, you can literally just mark this thing as it's read-only. So when it comes down to the device, the developer knows that this thing is read-only. And then what would end up happening is, as a developer in your code, you would have to react to that to say, hey, look, I'm not going to allow modifications to this document because I know for a fact that this document has a flag inside of it that says it's read-only. That's one of several different ways to do it, but really I think a combination of Sync Gateway technology where you could read those, the Sync Gateway allows you to look at every document's properties, and then based on those you can kind of make some decisions. That means when a document comes back up, you also can check it and say, wait a minute, this document says it's read only, but yet you're sending me a change to it. I'm not going to allow that. I'm going to send you back an error that says, no, this ain't going to happen. And that gets against the bug. Like if you make the assumption everything works, but you have a bug, right? And you accidentally do that because somebody changes some code. We want to make sure the Sync Gateway will be that thing that also checks and says, no, wait a minute, we have a validation code that runs. It's a JavaScript function, technically speaking, that runs on the Sync Gateway server. But we can then validate that, yes, this thing should be updated versus not updated. And so I'd recommend doing both. I'd recommend that you'd have a validator on your mobile client because that way you're not necessarily sending documents to the Sync Gateway server only to message back that you did something wrong. It's usually a good idea to have that business logic there, but to have a backup business logic in the Sync Gateway server kind of checks both balances and keeps both sides honest. This is no different than like your front side having business rules to check your React application maybe has some business rules that do data validation, and then you send it to your API server and it does data validation again because it doesn't know where the data came from. It doesn't know if it can trust it, right? So sometimes we do that, and especially in enterprise applications. I don't think that that's wrong because once again, it comes down to the source.
Cool. So Sync Gateway is also like the middleware that
it is
double check if something is a kind of firewall to avoid any bad data to reach the database, right? So you can always revalidate everything that is coming from the mobile app as well before it hits the database.
You got it. So remember back in school when we were in elementary school and we passed notes up and down the desk, you have a sticky note, you write a little message, tap the person's shoulder, give them a sticky note and say, send it up to my friend up there. Sync Gateway is that. You send the note to your friend and then your friend looks at it and they may give the note back to you and say, that was really dumb. She's not going to respond to that message that you just wrote that you like Transformers. That's a terrible message, right? So they may send it back or they may send it back up to the person up there. That certain person may take the sticky note and then send you a message back, right? When it comes down to it is that man in the middle, that person that's basically processing the information, sending up to the server and sending information back and forth in your behalf. So you don't have to talk directly to the server. And it guarantees that everybody can talk to everybody, right? Now, the cool thing is that technically speaking, if you have two phones, so I've got an iPhone and a tablet here, right? If there's a document change between these two devices, it doesn't have to go to the server to get over to this device. If I send it up my phone to Sync Gateway, and Sync Gateway says, oh, there's an iPad here that also is in need for that device, it doesn't go to server. It goes directly to that iPad. It doesn't need to go to server to do that. So it's not a round trip. Sync Gateway is really powerful in that if you have a bunch of teams working remotely, you don't have to worry about them necessarily syncing to the server. You just need to sync to Sync Gateway. It will take care of the rest of the magic for you. But it guarantees that all your people are internally synced. Now, this technology is based on WebSockets. And so because of that, we have in Couchbase Lite 2.7 and higher, you can run sync on your local phone. And you can run, because our SDK supports this, you literally can turn yourself into your mobile phone into a mini sync gateway server that can talk to other mobile devices, which means I can just peer-to-peer sync between my phone and this tablet. All you have to do is know where that tablet is and you're on the same network, and that actually does work. And we are working on tutorials that explain that, because that's a pretty cool piece of technology. That is like, you start thinking about that, you're like, I can see that where if you're in an audit, for example, if you're working at an accounting firm and you're auditing one of these big warehouses, and these warehouses have all these boxes of stuff in it, and you're trying to keep track of it, those warehouses have zero internet, right? But they're so big that you have to take different rows. You have to say, hey, Aaron, you take row 4, I'm going to take row 6, and we'll compare notes afterward. Well, that's where if you could do an internal sync between each other, you don't have to worry about like, how do I get this data and guarantee we both have what each other did? And that's kind of the reason why it kind of came out, was those kind of scenarios. And I can give you a bunch of other scenarios. Concert tickets is another kind of common thing, right? You go to a concert these days, they have this little hand device that's sitting at the door, and they scan your ticket and validate it's a good ticket. And then once they do that, they put it in a database and say, yes, that person showed up. That also, because we're running on IoT and we're running on these smaller devices, that could be an embedded database that tells the other ticket person, no, that ticket's already been used, right? Because the person scanning next to it, they don't want somebody to instantly reach through the bars and give somebody else that same ticket, and then 2 people are using the same ticket, right? And so if the scanners that are scanning the concert tickets don't have the same information of who has been let into the concert, that's a problem. But on these big arenas, right, if you go to these big arenas where they have 60,000 people showing up to these concerts, the Wi-Fi is terrible. And the mobile towers are completely overwhelmed with the amount of people at that concert with their mobile devices, right? So these are kind of situations where if you can do internal sync in between these devices, now you can keep everybody up to sync because everybody's pretty close to each other checking these tickets. And you're guaranteed that people aren't trying to reuse tickets at that point in time. So yeah. I can come up with like 100 different answers of why to do this kind of stuff, but it's amazing technology when you look at it.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, even tech conference, right? Even tech conference where Wi-Fi is supposed to be good, it is not. And yeah, well, I have been going to conference for years, and no matter what, internet still slow.
Yeah, absolutely. Those kind of things happen, right? So it is a great framework. It does those kind of things really, really well. And these are the kind of things that if you try to solve it without an embedded database, you're going to run into like 100 different challenges of trying to do that. And the whole thing is, I believe as developers, right? I'll leave you with this, right? If you are building a mobile app, I don't try to build a button. I use Apple's button. On Android, I use Android button. Why? Because they paid people millions of dollars to write code to make buttons that look good and show up and just work on the screen, right? Why would I rebuild technology that somebody else has already built that's been tested and works great? Well, I think about embedded databases the same way. Why would I try to build my own embedded database platform when somebody else has already invested a bunch of money, has a bunch of cool features built into it, and makes my life easier as a developer? I don't want to build that if somebody else has built that. I've got other things that in my app I need to worry about. User experience, those other things, right? Well, that's where this comes in. Couchbase Lite can come in and solve that problem for you, so you don't have to build that tech yourself. You should have to worry about like how to cache data in your app and stuff like that. These are really hard things that can get you into regression really easy, where you have bugs in your apps and you're trying to figure out why this local data that you're caching isn't cleaning up or recycling properly. And so it's just one of these cases where you learn as you get older at this, is that it's better to use technologies that have been tried and true than try to build it yourself, because you are always going to have more features than you can get out in your apps. And so anytime you can take advantage of these kind of tools, it's going to make your life better. Quality of life will improve greatly.
Cool. Thank you very much, Aaron. That was a very good conversation. I guess I could be here for hours.
Absolutely.
Let's say hello here to Gooden again. Hello from Siberia, and hi everybody that are watching us from Ukraine. Where are you calling from, Aaron?
I am currently in Atlanta, Georgia, in the little suburbs north of Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm originally from Michigan, so I can talk Canadian if you want. Like orewa, orewa, and yeah, hohe, and gok, I can do all those words if I need to, but I've been living down in the South a pretty long time, so I've kind of got myself out from speaking like that. I don't like cold. So I wouldn't like being in Siberia right now, and it's actually colder here than normal, so I'm not really happy about that, but I moved to the South so I didn't have to deal with snow.
Awesome. So I thank you very much for hosting this event again, Aaron.
Absolutely, anytime. And honestly, we have some really cool stuff coming up next month. I can't talk about it yet, but I promise you, we're going to have it. It's a monthly thing, and next month, if you thought this was cool, we're going to turn the dial up to 11. So please subscribe to us on YouTube so you get notifications when these events are happening. Obviously, you can follow us on Twitter. And we'll definitely put it out. And also a reminder that if you came in late, all this is video on demand. So you can scrub through and watch the videos you need to. So if you missed the part, you can go watch it later on YouTube or on Twitch.
Okay, with that, thank you very much, guys. And see you in the next event. And always keep in touch with us on Twitter and on the web.
Absolutely.
We are very accessible.
Stay safe, everybody. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.